Now, let's take a look at a risk event for the week starting Monday, 24th of January. Joining us now is Justin McQueen from DailyFX. Justin, good morning to you. What have you got for a risk event for next week?
Good morning, Jeremy. In terms of next week, I suppose there's plenty of risk events, and really the main ones in focus will be, of course, the Federal Reserve and the Bank of Canada. In terms of across that I'm looking at will be the Australian dollar against the Canadian dollar. Now, firstly, with the Bank of Canada, of course, we've seen upside surprises in inflation. We saw the Bank of Canada's Business Outlook survey post a relatively strong reading as well, with firms starting to raise their concerns over inflation, seeing inflation above the BOC's target for quite some time. And subsequently, markets have shifted quite a bit in terms of expecting a rate hike from the Bank of Canada next week, which does come in contrast to their most recent guidance, where they didn't see economic slack being closed or absorbed until the middle quarters, and therefore signaling that a rate hike could happen in the middle quarters of this year. However, we've continued to see some outperformance in the Canadian data, and subsequently it's 85% priced in for a rate hike next week. Now, the risk here is the fact that there is a lot being priced into the curve. We've seen at the moment near enough 6 rate hikes being priced in to the curve for the Bank of Canada. For me, I think that is a bit too aggressive. So while a hike next week, given the fact that we're not fully priced in, you can see an initial upside in the Canadian dollar. I do think that given some of the positioning of the Canadian dollar and given how aggressive the money market curve is, we could see maybe those gains in the Canadian dollar somewhat short-lived. Of course, the risk to going against the Canadian dollar is the fact that oil prices do remain on a bit of a tear at the moment. So, of course, that is one risk to consider. However, with the Australian dollar, we saw in the most recent labour market report the unemployment rate down at 4.2%. This is below not just pre-COVID levels, but also pre-global financial crisis levels. And 4.2% is a reading that the Reserve Bank of Australia was not expecting or not forecasting until at least 2023. So in terms of their outlook, and they've been one of the most dovish central banks out there in terms of rate hike expectations, and not expecting a rate hike until late 2023, early 2024. Well, markets are now bringing forward expectations of a rate hike, and subsequently, in terms of their meeting, which will be the following week after, they could either maybe end QE or maybe cut the purchases by another billion. So there is definitely some interest there in terms of the Australian dollar. Keep in mind as well, in terms of positioning, markets are heavily short the Australian dollar. Of course, we would need to see a bit of a stabilization in terms of equity prices, and then we can see a bit of an upside for the Australian dollar. This also moves on to Aussie dollar as well. Now, of course, I mentioned the Federal Reserve next week. Again, markets are very aggressive on the Federal Reserve. I mean, we've gone from 2 to 3 hikes to 3 to 4 hikes in the space of about 2 weeks, with the addition of QT as well. Now, of course, I mean, unless you believe Jamie Dimon, who's calling for 5 or 6 hikes, which to me seems a bit over the top, but nonetheless, if we're heading into this meeting with this uber hawkish sort of view from the market, potentially the bar is somewhat high for the Federal Reserve to sort of surprise on the hawkish side. So therefore, if we see a bit of a hawkish disappointment, then one of your better trades will be going long the Australian dollar, and perhaps against the US dollar as well, given the fact that you would see a bit of a bounce in risk assets, and subsequently further fueling upside for the Australian dollar. So definitely that'll be what I'm watching out for next week, and potentially on that sort of hawkish disappointment view, we could see some upside in the Australian dollar against the Canadian dollar, and also Aussie dollar as well.
Justin, thanks very much indeed. Justin McQueen from DailyFX, taking a look at a risk event for the week starting Monday, the 24th of January. For more videos from us here at IGTV, join us on Twitter at IGCom, Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.